Hi, in this session, we're going to be introducing Vray lights. So I'm going to just go to Create, and I'm going to go to the Light tab, and I'm going to select, instead of photometric, I'm going to go Vray. In here, we have several options, so I'm going to start introducing Vray Sun. First of all, I'm just going to draw something. So I'm going to go Create. I'm going to create a plane and just a box, as usual, and a teapot. I'm just going to go auto grid so I can snap it here. Great. Now I have this kind of scene. I'm going to go create light and Vray Sun. Before I go create a sun, if you go and render, you would see that my render should be black because I don't have lights. If I want to render without lights, I can go to the render setup and turn off GI. So I go to GI and turn it off. I'm going to talk about this later on in a bit. But if you have GI on, it will calculate all the lights in the scene. So in my case now, I don't have lights, so that's why it's going to be black. So if I turn off GI and then I try to render, you will see I will have lighting. By default, there's something called a default light which stands above the camera to light the scene. So if I turn off GI, then it means I'm just gonna turn on this default light so it will light the scene so I can see something. So in my case, I'm just gonna turn on GI because I want GI on, and I'm gonna leave the defaults for now. And I'm just gonna go create Vray Sun. I'm gonna go to the top view. Always preferably to draw the Vray Sun from the top view if you want. You can definitely draw it in the front, but usually I draw it from the top. So click wherever the sun I want the sun to be. So I want the sun to be maybe in here. So click and drag, and this is the direction of the sun, and this is the point in here is the target. So I'm just gonna release it in here. When I release the sun, it gives me this option. Do you want to automatically add a Vray sky to the environment map? For now, I'm just going to say yes. And when I say yes, I can go in here, rendering, environment. Instead of having the black environment, I can have a sky. Definitely, I can change this black environment to something else if I want it to be blue or green or whatever color, or I can add a map. In this case, I just added the Vray sky. Okay, later on in advanced courses, I will teach you how to create HDRIs instead of this default sky and to have more realistic lighting. So now I just created the sun. As you can see, the sun is in here at the floor. So if you can select the sun, you can lift it up to make it light this direction. And at the same time, I can select this target and I can move my target. As you can see, if I move my target, the sun will rotate and the direction of the sun will move. So I want the direction to be this way, and maybe the sun to be something like this, and I want it to be at this kind of height level. Great. Now, if I'm gonna render now, so I'm gonna go rendering, I'm gonna see something different. Okay. Now I have a light, but the light is overexposed. Great. Now I have two options. Either I work with the light settings, or I have to work with my camera settings. In my case, I don't have a camera, I have perspective. So I'm going to talk about the cameras later on. But for now, all I can do add an exposure control to the perspective view or to the views that I have. So I'm going to go rendering, environment, again. And under the background, I have something called exposure control. I'm going to go here, I'm going to add something called Vray exposure control. In my Vray exposure control, I have my mode, which is EV parameter or Vray camera or photographic. So I'm going to leave it as photographic. Okay. And if you're familiar with photography and cameras, these are the values that we use in cameras. So I have my shutter speed, my f number, and my ISO. So I'm just going to keep them as is. Okay. And I'm going to do another enter. And as you can see, my renders really differs, okay, because I added some kind of exposure control. Now, all I worry about in here is basically the ISO. The ISO is basically making the camera more sensitive to light or not. So if I bump this number to 500, and did this render, you would see the light is going to be more exposed. Okay, if I go lower than 100, let's say 20, it's going to be dark. I can just play around with the values in here, maybe 200, maybe 300, maybe 100, okay, and I can play around with the value to get amount of light I need. So this is one option which I would advise, but later on we will definitely not create this, but create just a camera, because inside the camera I have the exposure control inside, so I can work with that. But for now, because I don't have a camera, or maybe you don't want to have a camera at this moment, you can just add an exposure control to the perspective. Later on, when you add the camera, it will add the exposure control in it. So great. Now I have this value. Now, what about changing a bit of the sunlight? So I'm just going to do a render in here, and I'm going to keep this just live, and I'm going to go select the light. Just going to select the light and go to the Modify tab. In the Modify tab, I have few parameters that I really worry about. The first important parameters is intensity multiplier. Okay. Before that, I have just the enable and disable light. If I press the disable light, no more light from the sun coming. But as you can see, I can still see the render. So what's happening in here is basically I'm getting light from the environment that I just put with the sun that was in here in the environment. So this is the default sky. This light is coming from the sky now. But if I turn on the sunlight, you can see the direct light with the shadows is coming from the sun. The intensity multiplier is basically the power of the light. If I want the sun to be stronger, or maybe less, or maybe less, and less. Okay, so my value is 1 by default. Maybe I like it. If I want to bump it up, I can bump it up, or maybe lower it down. Size multiplier is basically the size of the sun. The bigger the sun is, the less sharp shadows I'm going to have. So I'm just going to make this bigger. I'm just going to show you what exactly is going to happen here. If I put the size up, as you can see, as if the sunlight is bigger. Technically, it's not going to be bigger. It's what's going to be. It's going to be filtered more, as if I have like some kind of softbox to it. So if I'm going to put the size instead of 1, I'm going to put it 20. As you can see, the shadows are a bit feathered. So I'm just going to show you before. So it was something like 1, something like that. Maybe less I wanted, 0.5. So it's sharper. And if I go, let's say 30 or 40 or 100, going to be flu and feathered, where you cannot see the sharp shadows. It's like soft light. It depends what kind of lighting you want from the sun. If it's cloudy and you don't have like really direct sunlight, the shadows will be a bit feathered. They won't be that sharp. But if the sunlight is direct, definitely the shadow is going to be sharp. So this is basically the most important thing. And the third option is basically the color of the light. So if I want the sun to be red, it can be red, or if I want it to be some kind of yellowish, definitely I can make it to be some kind of warm light, something like that. Instead of white, I can just play around with this. That's basically the most important part of the sunlight. Other than that, we have a lot of information and options. We will go through, let's say, the options. We'll go through the V-Ray lights. They are more accurate, and let's say there's more option, but we can use them in here. Later on, you can come back to sunlight. But that's basically what we need for the beginner level. So all we need is basically the intensity light, the size multiplier, and the color of the light. And that's basically it for the sun. And definitely, on the other hand, we need to have the direction of the light. Now, if I'm gonna just turn the light to be some kind of facing me, okay, from the other direction, something like that, I'm just gonna put my camera a bit down and make this a bit bigger and just closer, and I'm gonna render. As you can see, maybe a bit more. Just gonna rotate it a bit more. So I'm just gonna look a bit above. Okay, so something like that, and render. Now you can see I have the sky, which is getting or gathering a blue light. It's a gradient map, and this is the horizon, and which is below that is basically below the ground. So that's why it's kind of brownish. Now, if I play with the sun height, in this case, for example, I'm just gonna move the sun to be maybe lower. Okay, you would see that the sun will really differs and the map is going to really change. It's not bright blue, it's going to something kind of yellowish now. If I go lower than that, it's going to become more sunset. So the light does matter, or the map does really is linked to the sun. So wherever the sun is, if the sun is above, it's going to be more bluish. So it's like more noonish light. If I want the light to be sunset or early light, morning light, so it's going to be some kind of orangey. So this is kind of the light I'm gonna get. So the good thing about it with the sun and the environment that's linked to it is they are linked together. So wherever the sun is placed, you will get the color of the environment. So if you go a bit more, it's going to be more like a sunset, or maybe like the last few hours or the last few minutes of the day. So this is it. So if I go a bit lower, it's going to turn black at a certain time. So this is it. It's now black. It's just below the normal time of the light. So this is sunset. This is more noonish. And that's it. So this is a really cool thing that you can work around with the light. So depending on the light direction, you can get an environment with that where you can get some kind of different effect from the environment. So this is more like a sharp light. As you can see, it's here. It's kind of a bit more strong. So maybe I have to lower this down a bit, maybe 0.8. Maybe this is better. So now there's no, it's not overexposed at certain points. So this is what I'm going to get. A good lighting for all over the scene. Okay, so that's basically talking about sunlight. So you go just to create light, and I'm going to create Vray Sun. All you care about the Vray Sun is basically to enable the light, the multiplier of the light, the intensity multiplier, and the size multiplier, and the color. Okay, that's basically the main thing that you're going to really worry about. The second thing you have to worry about is the placement of the sun. If it's going to be noonish or maybe early morning or sunset, depends on the environment. Okay, definitely when you create the sun, you have to create the environment with it at this level. Later on, we can choose if we want to have our own HDRI. We will talk about that in later and advanced courses. And definitely one of the important things that you have to maintain, if you don't have a camera, if you're rendering from the perspective, make sure that you go to rendering environment and then you choose your exposure control, which I chose my Vray exposure control, and this is my default values. And definitely you can play around with these. I can change my white balance and whatever. It depends if you're more familiar with photography and cameras. These are the options that you would find inside a regular camera, SLR, or I mean DSLR, or advanced kind of camera. Okay, so that's basically it for the Vray Sun. The next session I'm going to talk about Vray lights and how we can work with them.